Hello and welcome to the latest Mark Talks Mags. It's going to be a bit of a different one this time. We tried it before with a look-in magazine which went down like a lead balloon, but rather than doing music mags all the time, I try and do something different. The sniffing glue one worked alright, so we're going to go back a few more years to what was basically a fanzine in 1968. We're going to have a look at Gandalfs Garden No.2. Now, for those that don't know what Gandalf's Garden was, it was a bit of a, how should we put it? It's a bit of a safer version of International Times or Oz, whereas they were very much rebel-rousing at times. Gandalf's Garden was a very safe, spiritual, almost mystical magazine, although still countercultural. And they had a shop in World's End, which was like a drop-in centre, like a lot of these countercultural magazines had shops as well. It was founded by a chap called Mus Murray, and I think it lasted for just 5 years, or something like that, 67 to 72 or thereabouts. The magazine ran for 6 copies, and I've got one here. Number 2 is from late 68, I would say, somewhere around about that. I don't know much about it. I picked this up probably 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago. I've never really looked at it, but so let's dig in and have a little look, shall we? So the cover is very much of its time. The counterculture were fascinated with artists like Beardsley and Alistair and people like that, so a lot of the illustration was of that ilk. So I'll open up and have a look inside. Little editorial: Gandalf the White Wizard from the trilogy of The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien is fast becoming absorbed in the youthful world spirit as the mythological hero of the age. As graven an image on the eternal psyche as Merlin of the Arthurian legends. Well, it doesn't surprise me that they were rather enamoured by Tolkien either, to be honest. We've then got, as in most magazines, we've got a list of the people involved in the magazine, and they called themselves gardeners. That much I did know. They called themselves gardeners, Gandalf's Garden, so the gardeners. Garden Law, Mus Murray, and so on down through them. And there's, I guess, probably 8, 12, 16, probably 25 people involved. Looking at the features in this edition, I won't read those out because it'll ruin it for you, won't it? But I can see that John Peel is involved, as is Spike Milligan and Billy Graham, the evangelical preacher, which I wonder how they looked at that. It says here, does Christ need a publicity agent? Is hard sell evangelism justified? There we go. So we go on to the next page. We got Mus Murray's piece. It says here, Gandalf's Garden is a monthly-ish venture published for people with love. Copyright 1968. As I say, very much, although countercultural, very much the peace and love side of it, rather than rebel rousing. Article here: mescaline, mysticism, and meditation. That's another thing I remember. Now we said this, that they very much condoned the use of psychedelics rather than hard drugs, which isn't surprising given what they're into and what is coming up so far here. Here's John Peel. What is the perfumed garden? So it's clearly a one-off article by John Peel. His radio programme, of course, at that point in time was the perfumed garden. Let's just have a little read through it, see if there's anything we can pick up here, music-wise. That's interesting. This is very interesting actually, because of course he went on to be a huge advocate of Mark Bolan. Someone sent me an acetate of Mark Bolan. He has a very strange voice and I don't know what to make of it. Well, of course, he very much liked it, and he backed him all the way until Mark, like he did with so many others, unceremoniously dumped him, unfortunately. He also says, "At last I have the Captain Beefheart LP. It's called Safe as Milk, and I'm going to play Sure Enough, and Yes I Do." So not a lot of talk of football by John Peel there. He then moves on to football, which is unsurprising, I suppose, being the Liverpool fan that he was. It goes about a boat trip he took, and in the bows there was fresh green paint, which became a field in the afternoon. The generators and Keith typing away took their sounds away, and the seagulls became messengers from our floral phase. There was no sadness because there was no room for it aboard. Liverpool 2, Chelsea 0. Being an Everton supporter, that doesn't go down too well, but there we are. And here we have Scene Around. This could be interesting. This is looks to be more music based. Just have a little read of this. To all those who helped to make the Gandalfs Garden Magical Sunday benefit at Middle-earth, the London club, the magical rave that it was, we owe our warmest thanks. Without you, we could not have made up the print bill for this issue. With you, we have just made it. Special thank yous to Tyrannosaurus Rex, Mark Bolan and Steve Took, who got up from a hospital sickbed to play for us. And to the light of Junior's eyes. Junior's eyes, of course, or part of Junior's eyes, were Bowie's backing band on what became known as the Space Oddity LP. Self-titled at the time, but what's known now as Space Oddity, that was Junior's eyes. To the dynamic Edgar Broughton Blues Band from the Midlands. Well, he dropped the blues, didn't he? And Edgar Broughton was most certainly the rebel-rousing end of the counterculture, so good for him for helping him out. To the outer spatial sounds of the Third Ear Band. To the enchantment of David Bowie's otherworldly mime, thanks to his management, Kenneth Pitt. Well. This was when Bowie was going through his mime stage, of course. He'd trained briefly with Lindsay Kemp. He was living for a while with his manager, Ken Pitt, who famously had an enormous crush on Bowie, and there's all sorts of stories about them. If you like David Bowie, I've got to say probably one of my two favourite Bowie books, and I have many, believe you me, is Ken Pitt's book, The Pitt Reports. It's a great book, seen from a different angle and well worth seeking out. Who else they thank? Ginger Johnson's African Tribal Drummers. Also to DJ Pat B, who stepped in to save the day when we discovered that John Peel had been suddenly called away on tour. Hapshash and a Coloured Coat, who could not play since the group dissolved but came to add their good vibrations. Sounds like a wild time. So this Scene Around article is just what's going on around the country. So they obviously mention various arts labs, which was very much in at the time. An arts lab was basically they would hire a hall or a back room at a pub, and people would come along and jam and have open mics and read poetry, and it was like almost like a weekly community affair for young people of the day. And again, going back to Bowie famously ran the Beckenham Arts Lab from a pub called the Three Tons. So then we got the Halifax Arts Lab, the Free Bookshop at Earl's Court, a free printing service by the Digger Printing Service. All of these things very much to do with the counterculture. Free food is distributed every night in various parts of London by the Simon Community Soup Run. Sadly, those sort of things are still going on. We never learned, did we? Turning the page, more Scene Around. What's this? Paranoid Balearics. Of course, Ibiza particularly was way before the rave days, was a hotbed for hippies nipping over there for a bit of this and that. Anyway, foreigners on the Balearic Islands are having a hard time of it at present. In Dea, Mallorca, a French girl was raped and immediately all non-residents were arrested and herded into the local schoolhouse. Anyone who looked foreign was stopped and asked for their papers in the street. When it was found to be a Spaniard who did the deed, the heat cooled and the authorities decided that the girl had been on drugs and imagined it, despite the fact that she was in hospital recovering from the attack. Nobody in Dea has dared throw a party since, and the silent scene awaits further harassment in anxious paranoia. Well, it seems the authorities and the police in Mallorca at the time were not too happy about young foreigners going over and partying. It says here, on nearby islands of Formentera and Ibiza, the owners of bars and cafes have been threatened with closure if they continue to serve people with long hair. Drug raids have increased everywhere and many pot smokers have been thrown off the islands. The local noddy men have taken to baiting hippies and punching them, then arresting anyone who hits back. All those holidaying there, be friendly to your guardia civil. Charm them with as much Spanish you can speak and turn on the locals and stay cool. Well. Wasn't long before they were welcoming tourists, was it? But certainly not at that point, not if you had long hair anyway. An ad here for Junior's Eyes. An ad for the Macrobiotic Restaurant at 136A Westbourne Terrace. An advert for Granny Takes a Trip, the shop. A weekly poem by Peter Finch. And then a double-page article, The Key to Self-Realisation. Very much what Gandalfs Garden was about. After seeking the universal secrets from gurus in the Himalayas for many years, Ramurti Mishra experienced the bliss of samadhi, excuse if I get any pronunciations wrong, and finally understood God as his ultimate guru. He came to the West revealing the science of sound vibration and found idyllic ashrams in the New York State and southern France. Now he quietly travels the world, giving guidance to small esoteric groups in divine service to the cosmic eye. Well, not really my cup of tea. The letters page. Let's take 2 ticks, just I'm going to look down through here. What's this? I'm going to read this out without looking further. With reference to last week's incident in which over 100 students from Essex University were involved in a brush with a sabre-carrying guardsman, what a wonderful thing it would have been if the guardsman had lopped off an arm or a leg or two. How excellent example it would have been for the hacked-up survivors to parade in front of the rest of the university. Perhaps there would be more time spent on lessons then. Incidentally, do they get any public money for doing what they do of this nature? Surely these fools realise we need Porton Down to discover adequate means of defence, for there are others who would very quickly use germ warfare on us, and why not? Surely the object of defeating an enemy as quickly as possible with the least possible risk to oneself is one of the first rules of warfare. So this is obviously, I guess, some peace protesters got into a brush with the army, and this chap's J. Miles of Stanway, chap or chapess, is standing up for them. There we go. Love Poem by Brian Wake. Brian Wake is a poet, and I quote well. He's a Liverpudlian poet from my home city, and he was, of course, Liverpool at the time was a bit of a hotbed for poetry, with the 3 members of the Scaffold and many others. And his poem here is Love Poem for the Insane. mentions Van Gogh, Allen Ginsberg, Picasso, etc., etc. Communications with emphasis on the commune, so I'm guessing this is various communes and the like. This is the article about Billy Graham, the evangelical preacher, which we'll skim over. And Spike Milligan's piece, The White Flag. It's a piece from Milligan's book, A Dustbin of Milligan. So presumably the team at Gandalfs Garden approached Milligan the same as they would have done John Peel and asked if he could give something for the next issue, and he did. Olympics for Peace. Masashi Nii, an electrical engineer from Japan who is on a world tour to publicise the horrors of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, was interviewed recently by members of Parliament in private at the House of Commons. Mr. Nii is dedicating his life to work for peace and towards focusing the attention of the world to its potential self-destruction by atomic warfare. Quite poignant, isn't it, to think that this is published in 1968, which is just 23 years after the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And although that seems quite a lot until you think to yourself 23 years ago, we were only 3 years from the millennium, 1997. Wasn't a long time, was it? More poems. Oh, and no, there's an article on Junior's Eyes now. Mick Wayne was the lead guitarist and vocalist, and he played guitar on, as I said, Bowie's Space Oddity LP. Good band, actually, I've got to say, Junior's Eyes. Seed Bag, more letters. Obviously, the team had been sending it out to various exporters and the like to see if other countries they dealt with were interested. And it says here, this is from Gordon and Gotch Limited, the exporters. We have at last received a reply from our associates in South Africa pointing out that they are afraid that they in South Africa are perhaps not sufficiently civilised to appreciate a magazine of this type and therefore will not consider or order any supplies. Good grief. Incredible. Dear Muzz, thank you for issue 1. This is issue 2 of Gandalf's Garden. Congratulations, this scene is really hatched out of love. Knowing something about the centre, I expected the best and I got it. Keep it cool by keeping up the involvement. Digging for victory. Eastern religion is more involved, I know, but don't forget the yoga of the West. On that line, it was good to see something about Swedenborg. Yes, best wishes in your digging. Yours in the great work, Morris Lane of Sale, Cheshire. Dear Muzz, I managed to get a copy of Gandalf's Garden just as I was leaving Middle-earth on Sunday. As I said before, Middle-earth was the club that basically picked up the reins after UFO Club on Tottenham Court Road shut. I'm very glad I did. I've been waiting for something of depth to emerge from the underground or anywhere for a long time. Although I dropped out for nearly a year, I did not merge with, join or what have you, any underground commune or people, because I felt there was no real development or maturity there, just a bit of legalised drugs, etc., and a generally pathetic inability to cope with the society around them. I have been severely moved by Donovan and John Peel, to name a few. And on and on and on he goes. So it seems that the spiritual or mystical side of Gandalf's Garden certainly appeared to the more gentle of the long hairs, as they called them. Let's be honest, this is only a year after 1967, the so-called Summer of Love. And I think it's clear to see, if you've looked at the counterculture at all from that sort of period, that after 1967, that the hippies from there moved in two distinct directions to remain peace-loving hippies on one side and to become the freaks on the other side. They all still had long hair, but I've always found it odd that people called a lot of the Ladbroke Grove crew, from which emerged bands like Hawkwind, Pink Fairies, Third World War, etc. They called them hippies. They weren't hippies. They weren't peace-loving hippies, believe you me. They were freaks. And on we go. And just a list of what's going on around the country. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, before I come on to that, inside the back page we've got a half-page ad for International Times. And then a couple of small ads for Gandalfs Garden, including Send Away for a Poster, which, as I was saying, is very, very much in a style of... a lot of you won't know who Alistair was, but he was an artist who in the early years of the 20th century, ploughed a very similar furrow to Aubrey Beardsley. Not so many blacks as Beardsley, and not quite as scary, if you like. But yeah, very similar to Alistair. And what we have here is the Inner Garden newsletter. Now, as I said, the magazine Gandalfs Garden only ran for 6 issues, and I think, I could be totally wrong here, I think had finished probably by the end of '69. And they obviously, I didn't realise this, they obviously carried on with a newsletter. And here we have the Inner Garden newsletter, number 3, for Midsummer 1971, so 3 years later. It'd be pushed in the back of this one. And this is, just briefly look at this. This is, from Mus Murray, the founder of the whole Gandalfs Garden concern, just telling you what he's been up to and what have you. There's a lot of talk here about the seed centres, which were... I always thought the seed centres were places that sold marijuana seeds, in my naivety. They weren't. They were places where the seed of mystical enlightenment could be planted, and that was the whole idea, if you like, of the Gandalfs Garden shop, where people could drop in and homeless people could spend the day lounging about on comfy cushions and the like. So it was where seeds were planted, but not literal seeds, and they were all around the country. And here we have Friends of the Garden Seed Centre news, which is interesting. It's got the various ones here. But on the front here, this is interesting for my Norwich friends. Tina and Jeff Coop are running the Friends of the Garden Central Seed Centre in Norwich, and are responsible for coordination of all seed centres. Newsletters and forwarding of mail to the original gardeners are now known as the Inner Garden Ashram Group, and the gardeners are spread out all over the world. And on the back here we've got a short list of the various places where the seed centres are. And there's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 12 that are up and going. And there's a list here. Here is a list of seed centres trying to get it together. And there's a list of another half dozen, one of which is in Bristol, my old stamping ground. But the Norwich one, Tina and Jeff Coop, Central Seed Centre, were at 24 St Margaret's Close, Halstead in Norwich. I wonder if they're still in Norwich. I guess they'd be early 70s now, mid 70s. I wonder if they're still about. Anyway, and there finishes our delve into the gentle side of the counterculture. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's not been particularly informative, but it's been interesting. If not for you, certainly for me. So until the next time, when we'll get back into my garbled things about music, we'll see you next time. Bye. Talks Talks Mags.